Hey folks, this video is going to go over the affirmative case, which is what we went over at Thursday's practice. So if you missed it, this video will hopefully help you get all caught up. So to start off, it was a file that was handed out at practice called the Secure Data Act Affirmative. And if you weren't at practice, you wouldn't have gotten a paper copy. However, I have attached this file to the email that I sent out, so I would recommend that you go ahead and download that so you can follow along while we go through this video. So basically, this file, the stack of paper, this is what we use in a debate round to bolster our argument. It's a packet of evidence, of quotations from experts on the topic that we're talking about that we can read in the debate to support our side. And it's divided into a couple different categories. So if you open up the first page, the very first page at the top, this is the index. So it lists the header, so whatever is on each page, and then the page number where you can find that. So if you're ever trying to look for a particular piece of evidence, you should always consult the glossary, and it will tell you right where that is. So we flip that over, we go to the next page. On the second page is the glossary. So there are a lot of words in this file, used in the evidence that are kind of technical that you probably wouldn't know just from going to high school, that are about like encryption and the NSA and surveillance, things like that. And so we have a page here of key terms that I thought would be important for you to know. There's probably going to be other things in the evidence that you might not necessarily know, but I think this will give you a pretty good start to help. So I would look over this before I look at anything else in the file. So after the glossary, then we've got a stack of pages labeled 1AC, and that's pages 3 through 10. And this is the first affirmative constructive. This is your speech. It's pre-written. There's nothing you need to add to this. This is what you will be reading from. And so now you're probably looking at this going, this is a weird looking format. Like there's some big bolded things at the top, and then there's underlined stuff. Like what is it that I actually read? Well, that's a great question. So this page here, this is called a card. So it's a text of an article that's been taken out of that article, given a citation, given a summary statement at the top, and then underlined for use in a debate. So this is our evidence. We call it a card because way back in the old days of debate, in like the 60s or 70s, people would actually cut out pieces of articles, tape them onto index cards, write little summaries at the top, and then use them in their debates. So we still call them cards even though they're not on actual index cards anymore. And we still call them cutting cards even though we don't cut them out of paper. So just a little history lesson on the terminology. And so then what you would read on this sheet of paper is the summary statement at the top. This is called the tag. So if you think like on the internet, you have a video and you put a little tag at the bottom that says what it is about. This is like a longer version of that. It summarizes to the judge the evidence that you're about to read and tells the judge what argument you're trying to make with it. So for example, here, I would read, contention 1 is cybersecurity. That's sort of an introductory statement to talk about what part of the speech I am about to give. And then the NSA is inserting backdoors into encryption standards now. This leaves the nation vulnerable to a cyber attack. That was the tag. That summarized the evidence that I'm about to read. Then you'll see that there's a citation, and part of it's underlined and part of it's not. You just want to read the underlined portion. So Sasso, technology correspondent for the National Journal 14. We don't need to read the URL or the article title or the first name of the author, any of that. Then there's the underlined part of the article text. You don't need to read the ununderlined part, just the underlined. Now, this speech, if you were to try to fit this whole thing in 8 minutes, you would probably fail unless you are a very, very fast speaker. So what we do is we highlight down the underlined part. So you would think, okay, what is the part of this that I most think should be included in the speech? What is the most important part of this argument? And I've gone through and I've highlighted what I thought I wanted to include and left out the stuff I thought was unnecessary. I've done that for my entire 1AC. So if you go to the next page, I've also got some highlighting On this page, I have green highlighting because I highlighted it in yellow and then decided it was still too long, so went over it again with another color, and you can do that. And so that's how you construct the 1AC to make it readable. And then what you would do is practice your 1AC and try and get it within the 8-minute time limit. And if you look on the YouTube channel, I also have a first affirmative constructive demo speech that you can listen to so that you have a better idea of what that's actually supposed to sound like, because I get that it can be kind of confusing what you're actually supposed to read here. I also have attached a highlighted version of a card to the email that shows you what highlighting looks like. All right, so we got the 1AC. Now we're on page 11, and this is where we have evidence for speeches beyond the 1AC. So mostly this would be for the 2AC. You might occasionally use a piece of evidence in your first affirmative rebuttal, but generally speaking, most people don't use evidence beyond the constructive speeches, with the exception of the first negative rebuttal, which, as you'll remember, is basically a constructive speech, just shorter. So it says here, inherency extensions backdoors now. And I think this would be a good time to explain what is inherency and some of the what are called stock issues of an affirmative case. So the first stock issue is inherency, and this is a question of whether or not the plan inherently, or it's a question of whether or not the plan has already happened or that there's some kind of inherent barrier to the plan occurring. And so it functionally describes the status quo, what is going on now. Because if the negative were able to prove that our plan had already passed through Congress, or that the NSA was no longer putting backdoors, which I guess I'll get to in a minute because that is what the case is, but prove that the NSA is no longer doing the bad things that we're saying they're doing, that would be a problem for us. So we need to prove that the stuff's going on now. That's what inherency does. And so as you'll see, there's some evidence about the status quo. Then next page, a cybersecurity extensions, and it's got an overview. So this is like a 2AC second affirmative constructive summary of what we said in the first affirmative constructive. It goes through the different parts of our case and explains them. And this is the part of the case called harms and significance. So harms is what is bad that is happening that needs to be solved. And significance is why does that issue matter? So for our case, the harms are that when the NSA is currently trying to put what are called backdoors into encryption technologies. So essentially they are making the things we use to secure our online communications weaker so that they can hack into them to spy on what people are doing. So for example, if I sent an email that's encrypted through Google, but the NSA has been pressuring companies like Google to put loopholes into that protection so that they can find them and then be able to look at what I'm doing if they think I'm a terrorist or something like that. The problem is not just the NSA can find those loopholes. Hackers can figure those out too. Criminals can figure them out too. And if they're put in there, there's no such thing as a loophole or a backdoor that only law enforcement can find. And so our argument is that really endangers cybersecurity because now we have really weak protections, and cyber terrorists who want to inflict harm on U.S. networks, now it makes it a lot easier for them to actually do that. So that's the harms. Then what is the significance of that? Why does a cyber attack matter? Well, our evidence goes into a lot of detail and talks about what would happen if there was a cyber attack on critical infrastructure like the grid. It says that our grid is actually very vulnerable to cyber attacks, and that the encryption technology that the NSA is weakening is actually being used to protect critical infrastructure like the power grid or phone lines or water safety. All of these things rely on some level of network protection, and if cyber attackers were able to figure that out, we could have some serious problems on our hands. They might be able to derail trains. They could potentially contaminate water supplies. They could even shut down the power grid, which would potentially affect nuclear power plants. It could affect the military and our readiness abroad because the military would be scrambling with a sustained power outage. And our evidence actually says that these hackers would not just shut it down for like 2 hours, because obviously if the power went out for a couple hours, that wouldn't be that big of a deal. What they would do is use the software to destroy the hardware to actually like essentially blow up the systems, which would create outages for potentially months, which would be obviously catastrophic for a lot of reasons. And so that's the significance of our case. Now, so we have inherency, harms, and significance to review. Now we need to prove that we solve all of that. So the next section, and you'll see there's a lot of evidence. You're not expected to read all of this in your second affirmative constructive. Mostly what you would read is the 2AC overview, and then if there's any specific point that the negative brings up and you think you need more evidence to respond to it, you could use this file to find good evidence to support your point. Then the last back part of the file is solvency extensions. Solvency is how do we fix the problem? Does the plan actually make it better? And our plan is that we would ban the NSA from either forcing or otherwise compelling private companies from weakening their encryption standards, essentially. And this is based on the Secure Data Act, which is why your file is titled Secure Data Act Affirmative. It's a part of that legislation. And so we have evidence that says the Secure Data Act would be really good for this, and that it would definitely curb the NSA's ability to weaken encryption, and that strong encryption is overall better for law enforcement and better for the security of our country, even if the NSA says, well, we need to be able to hack these networks to find terrorists. Our evidence says otherwise, and there's plenty of other things they can do to find them. So that's solvency. Now, the last stock issue is topicality. And this isn't something that our file addresses. It's something we'll talk about a little bit later on, but I want to introduce you to it now so that you can start to get it in your head. This affirmative, so remember, as you'll remember, we have a resolution. It says the United States federal government should substantially curtail domestic surveillance. Our plan does not have to be the resolution. It just has to be an example of the resolution. However, if our plan is not an example of that resolution, then even if we make a really good case for it, we're not going to win. So if the resolution is to reduce surveillance and I say plan, I should be able to have nap time during my classes or something. I don't know. We plan high school should have nap time. That's not an example of surveillance. That's like a totally different random statement, and that is not topical. So obviously nobody would say that as their affirmative, but there are small distinctions between what is actually an example of curtailing surveillance and what is not. And so we might end up having some debates about whether or not eliminating backdoors is indeed an example of domestic surveillance or not. I kind of think this is a very, very core of the topical case, but I guess we'll see. So, all right, thanks for watching. Bye.